Welcome to A Reason for Hope, your question connection with the entire Word of God. We would love for you to join in our conversation. Simply follow us on our Facebook page at Calvary Christian Fellowship of Tucson. If you have a question, email or text us at questionsforhope@gmail.com. Now here's your host, pastor, author, and Bible teacher Scott Richards, along with his right-hand man, Sean Richards.
Well, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to this edition of A Reason for Hope. We're delighted that you're with us this hour to take on your questions on the Word of God. That's right. Any question you have about the Bible, any question you might have about applying the Bible to the issues of life, we are all over it here on the broadcast. Maybe a tough question or two has been lobbed your way by a skeptic or a non-believer. Hey, bring it on. We have discovered time and time again the Bible has even more powerful answers. So you want to lay hold of those so that you're more confident in being able to share the Word in these incredibly challenging days. We would love to be able to help you out. If you'd like a take on the events of the day, even the events of tomorrow, through biblical prophecy, we are all over it. Just feel free to join us. You can join us in real time on our Facebook feed at Calvary Christian Fellowship of Tucson. Just join our comment corner and get your questions to us. We will respond to those questions as we receive them on our comment corner. If you are not able to join us live on our Facebook feed, joined here by my right-hand man, protege, all-around good guy, Sean Richards, how can people get their questions to us?
Well, again, joining us on Facebook where we are live streaming. If you give us a like there, you'll be notified of when we go live. But the questions are open and available to be sent in at any time. So if you'd like to join us on our phone line, the number is 1-877-556-1212, and that will send you to voicemail. Leave your name and your question after the tone and notifying you'd like this call directed to A Reason for Hope, Scott Richards, whatever you would associate with us, and we will be able to answer it on the broadcast here today in text-to-speech, so we won't be broadcasting voices or anything like that either. If you'd like to email us, questionsforhope@gmail.com will remain open. We are working on our Parler account, but Twitter will be open while we still have that door to pass through at scotr4h@twitter.com. Our YouTube page is under the same level of scrutiny, but also the same availability for now, so we will use it at A Reason for Hope. And also note that if you'd like to join us on the air, you will have to join us on Facebook, and that is at Calvary Christian Fellowship of Tucson. And whatever resource you utilize, we'll look forward to seeing you there and hearing from your questions on God's Word.
Yeah. Hey, a couple things. First of all, thank you all for all the lovely birthday greetings you've sent along to me. You know, my position on birthdays is well known. All I really did was show up that day, and so I always make it a point to call my mom and sing Happy Labor Day to you because she did all the work. And so I did that earlier today. And again, Mom, if you're watching us on Facebook, thank you so much for being pro-life. It made a decided difference in my destiny. So I can't think of anything more wonderful to celebrate than that. Let's pray and commit the broadcast to the Lord. Lord, thank you that we have this opportunity today to really enjoy this exploration of your word. So many exciting things happening, so many prophetically significant things happening in the world. We want to be on top of that, but even more, we want your word to search us, to show us those areas where we need your touch, where we need to change, where we still need to grow. Thank you, Lord, that the righteous man falls 7 times but rises again, your word says. And so, Lord, if there are some within the sound of my voice who feel like they've stumbled a bit, I pray that they'd get back on their feet as a result of what goes on the broadcast today. If there are some who are really hitting their stride, I pray, Father, that this would be a real great coach 'em up session for them in order to be able to run with endurance the race that is set before him. Thank you, Lord, for this privilege and joy we have of sharing this time together. We don't take it for granted. Each and every day we have this broadcast as a gift from your hand. So use it and use it to draw us closer to you, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. We haven't heard from them in a while, not as if they haven't been doing anything, but nonetheless, what has been done has been reported, so we want to mention it. There was an event that took place in Lebanon recently, wasn't there?
Yeah, a little prophecy update for you. A little bit earlier today, there were 2 massive explosions that took place in Beirut, Lebanon. If you go online, you can actually watch some of the videos that were taken. You'll see, first of all, a white cloud of smoke then some little flashes below it, and then, boy, this this explosion. Some have described it as emerging like a mushroom cloud. Some were wondering if it was like some kind of small nuke or something like this. Obviously, they're in Lebanon with events leading up to all of this. You may be aware, we've mentioned this, that there were a couple of incidents on the border between Israel and Syria and Israel and Lebanon. As you know, the terrorist group Hezbollah operates in Syria and in Lebanon, and in a couple of different instances over the last week, they've attempted to send terror teams across the border with explosives to wreak havoc on Israeli citizens on the other side of the border. Well, Israel responded by taking out those terror teams, but then following up on all of this, suddenly this explosion takes place. So the standard operating procedure is to think, okay, Israel must have done something to Hezbollah in response to some of these terror attacks. Well, the best information that we're getting from the sources that we have, some of our friends in Israel and so forth that really do have some insight into these things, is that it isn't something that looks like an Israeli attack. However, it is something that looks like a huge cache of explosives that Hezbollah had set aside for their planned future war with Israel apparently went up. And there have been some high-placed people in the Lebanese government who have said, no, it wasn't a missile attack or anything along this line. It was merely this explosion. There have even been some that have pointed out that there are grain silos there in the port of Beirut that were near the explosion. If you remember a few years back, a grain silo in Texas City, Texas, spontaneously combusted, and when those things go up, the amount of damage they do is pretty horrific. In Lebanon, windows were shattered over 6 miles away from this particular explosion, and some of the more impressive videos of this, just to get an idea of how awful this explosion was, were taken by people on ships waiting to come into port. You really, I mean, it looks like one of those special effects things where you actually see the shock wave coming across the water at the ship, and they're just filming, and then suddenly everyone gets knocked over.
It got really loud.
It got really loud, and people got thrown about. Nearest statistics we have on this is that there's estimated at this point 25 dead and many, many people who have been wounded. Israel has reached out to the government of Lebanon and has offered medical and humanitarian assistance in the crisis. Whether that's accepted or not, we really kind of doubt. But the timing of all this is also significant in that the United Nations was going to come down with a verdict against, potentially against Hezbollah for the assassination of former Lebanese Premier Rafiki Hariri that took place a few years ago. That was supposed to happen this week. So the interesting developments that are going on here, what exactly happened? Was this, in a sense, a way of Israel, or even some theorists say the Mossad, coming in and saying, you guys just really don't want to mess with us. It's not going to be pleasant for you if you do. My personal take is, I think that what you're seeing here is really Hezbollah reaping what they sowed. One of the interesting videos of the explosion showed first the white cloud going up, and then you would see little sparks down below, and then the huge red cloud went up afterwards, the more massive explosion that took place.
There was a chain reaction that resulted in this.
Well, there's a couple of theories as to what those little sparks were. Some of them will say that the original Hezbollah explanation was this was a fireworks factory that exploded. Well, the government said no, it wasn't a fireworks factory, and they said the little sparks were little fireworks going off before the big one blew up. A fireworks factory wouldn't create that kind of explosion. But the little sparks may very well have been the same phenomena you see when bullets go off that are being stored. They just begin to explode and so on. So that may, in fact, be what's going on here. The enemies of God's people storing up all of these weapons, as you know, from our previous analysis of what's gone on in the back and forth in the Gaza Strip, in Gaza City. You know that Hamas down there follows a pattern of putting their most valuable resources where civilians essentially are human shields, where individuals who are innocent are in harm's way as a way of protecting their caches of weapons and so forth from being taken out. Well,
They've done this since the 40s when it comes to staging their rocket platforms in playgrounds, and then when the Israelis
hospitals,
shot back,
yeah,
and then they were
yeah.
blamed for war crimes when in reality the violation was on Hezbollah. But no one wants to be an Islamophobe.
So the bottom line is this. The enemies of God's people, Hezbollah, I believe, have suffered a massive blow on two fronts. First of all, probably a large shipment of these explosives that has come from their sponsors in Iran is no longer usable. That's probably the best way to look at it. The second thing is this is a real blow to Islamic pride in the region as far as radical Islam is concerned. And you have to understand, the tragedy that is Lebanon. Lebanon used to be known as the Riviera of the Arab world. Back in the 60s and the 70s, it was just a beautiful place. Beirut was considered just a gem of a place. People would go there for vacations and so on. But then the French basically pulled out. They allowed the Lebanese to be able to form a government that was divided into Sunnis and Shiites as far as Muslims were concerned, and then there was a Christian faction as well. And the government was sort of staged in a way that the Christian faction would have more influence than either of the two Islamic factions. They couldn't gang up and dominate and so on. And while that particular form of government was sort of backed by the French, things were quite peaceful. But with the rise of militant Islam and Iran, particularly after the fall of the Shah, there was a horrible civil war that went on in Lebanon. You probably remember the pictures of the daily fighting that went on there. Lebanon's prime minister came out. The cabinet minister of finance resigned and said Lebanon is this close to becoming a failed state at this point. It's the people there that previously were peaceful and just kind of wanted to be neutral in terms of these kind of squabbles were absolutely overrun by Hezbollah. Hezbollah has basically set up all kinds of missile emplacements in northern Lebanon, biding their time and waiting for the right moment to attack Israel. But with a development like we see today, a couple things. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3 comes to mind. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you.
And cursing the Jews has become very popular, very common, and in this situation, simply one more example of people to point fingers and say, well, the Jews did it.
Yeah, well, again, Israel, I don't believe, actually had anything directly to do with it, but the enemies of Israel certainly did. So we'll keep you posted on any further developments that go on here. Once again, another rumors of wars situation. Things are becoming more and more intense as far as the conflict between Israel and Syria is concerned. Another development is that the Russians have concluded a deal with the government of Bashar al-Assad, the dictator of Syria, to equip him with some almost state-of-the-art Russian fighters to be able to balance out Israel being able to go over and take out various, arms military emplacements as they've been doing over the last couple of weeks. So, with the COVID virus going on, it's just funny. Now we're getting into another birth pain, wars and rumors of wars, as Matthew chapter 24 tells us to pay attention to, particularly as they pertain to Israel. We could talk about some of the saber rattling that's going on in the South China Sea between China and the United States right now, but that's somewhat minor compared to what's going on there in the Middle East. So pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and we as believers in Christ know that when these things begin to happen, we're to look up, for our salvation draws near. So we have a hope even in the midst of these things, but be praying for the Israeli government, be praying for the people who obviously have lost loved ones, and those who have been wounded in this disaster that has taken place, and pray that the good news of Jesus Christ continues to go forth and perhaps changes the hearts and lives of these individuals who've taken up the sword. God can turn them around and take the sword from their hand and put the love of Jesus in them. So the weapons of our warfare are not carnal but spiritual, for the pulling down of strongholds and any proud idea that it exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So the real battle is for the hearts and minds of people. So be praying.
And be informed. Make sure that when people address you, or are you given the opportunity to discern these sort of news reports as they come in, or rather as they are presented, that we are able to be discerning as well and not fall for these sort of traps that are undoubtedly going to be spread. I got a question from Mike, who wants to know, when the Bible speaks of God giving you over to something like a sin, can that happen to a Christian? Well, the passage you're quoting, Mike, in noting God gave them up to vile passions, understand that the category that are being spoken of there aren't those who
those
have
aren't
received.
believers. Yeah.
Let me start in Romans chapter 1 and verse 19, where it says, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, and God has shown it to them. Let me start in verse 18 rather. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what we may known of God is manifest to them. So these are the people who know about God, but are proactively suppressing that knowledge and trying to live in, I guess, spite of it rather than light of it.
Right.
And then it goes on to note in verse 24, after giving examples of how this is lived out, it says, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Now, Mike, I know when you're struggling with a area of sin in your life that you feel, and this is the operative word here, feel that you're being given up to these sort of things because we're living out what was our old life in bondage and slavery to sin. What's interesting about a slave is that their, I guess, quality of life is heavily dependent, especially in the context the Bible is using the term, on the charity and goodwill and the recognition of rights of their master. And if your master is sin incarnate, separation from God, then by definition that would not be a good master. He wants to rule you, to run you, and to continue to do so until you are in the ground and then 6 feet more. The wages of sin is death, Romans also emphasizes 5 chapters later. So if we understand that and recognize the life that is in slavery to sin is obviously going to be a miserable one, but nonetheless an attractive one because it's one we default to by nature. We need to be careful not to confuse that with the judgment of God on our sin, because as we've stated before many times in the broadcast, oftentimes God will judge sin by letting us do it. We'll find out firsthand just how fun that really is going to be in the end.
Right.
There is a way that seems right to a man, Proverbs says, but the end of it is death, I believe Proverbs. But noting that point, if we're going to make a distinction between how God deals with a suppressor, I guess, in this case, as opposed to his children, what would be the key difference?
Yeah, I think the key difference is that God never allows, a difficult set of circumstances, or even the consequences of our actions to come into our lives to defeat us. It's been said, but to complete us. And, the difference is, God giving them over. We get this idea that, the Lord just said, hey, enough's enough. I'm done with you. You've pushed the limit too far. Some people that I've ministered to down through time have really thought, oh, I must have done that because, I've fallen in an area of sin I never thought I'd fall in,
or haven't in a very long time.
So, the question is this: all right, how far do you have to push the envelope for God to give up on you as a believer?
I guess you have to strain out the last ounce of the Holy Spirit's patience.
Well, yeah, and a classic example of this is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, where the Apostle Paul deals with a situation in Corinth that kind of, makes you a little ill when you think of the implications of it all. He was saying that there was a guy in the church at Corinth in good standing that was involved with sexual immorality as not as even named among the Gentiles.
Even people who don't know God are grossed out by this.
Yeah, a man has his father's wife. And you're puffed up and have not rather mourned that he who has done this deed might be taken away from you. For indeed, as absent in the body, though present in spirit, I have already judged as though I were present him who has so done this deed. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, when you are gathered together along with my spirit, with the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, deliver such one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. Now, notice what's being talked about here. This individual is being given over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. Most scholars have the consensus that what's being talked about here is that God is going to remove, in a sense, the protective hedge he puts about us and allow Satan to really have at this guy. Kind of like with Job. You might recall that Satan asked God to let Job have it in two very significant ways. Take away everything he has, he'll curse you to your face. Again, take away his health, and for sure, he'll turn his back on you. Now, Job was completely innocent in those situations, but it is illustrative of the fact that Satan can't just do whatever Satan feels like doing. Everything has to go through the hands of God. And so this giving over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh was probably a description of God's most intense kind of chastisement he could ever give to one of his children.
One of his children.
And the reason I say one of his children is this. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, we're told that this strong medicine from God evidently worked because in verse 3 we are told, and I wrote this very thing to you, lest when I came I should have sorrow over those for whom I ought to have joy, having confidence in all of you that my joy in you is the joy of all. He says, for out of much affliction and anguish of heart I wrote to you with many tears, that you should not that you should be grieved, that you might know the love I have so abundantly for you. But if anyone has caused grief, he has not grieved me, but all of you to some extent, not to be too severe. This punishment which was inflicted by the majority is sufficient for such a man, so that on the contrary, you ought all rather to forgive and comfort him, lest perhaps such a one be swallowed up with too much sorrow. Therefore I urge you to reaffirm your love to him. For to this end I also wrote, that I might put you to the test whether you're obedient in all things. Now, whom you forgive anything, I also forgive. For if indeed I've forgiven anything, I've forgiven that one for your sakes in the presence of Christ, lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we're not ignorant of his schemes. Now, notice what Paul has to warn them about. This strong medicine has worked. This guy's going, oh man, I repent, enough of this. But the church at Corinth was now kind of folding their arms and saying, you made us look bad in the eyes of the Apostle Paul, and we're just not really sure you're all that sorry, and you just really, And when Paul goes, no, you need to restore this person. But the most important thing that I would share with you in all of this is that nowhere in this process is this guy ever treated as a non-believer.
Never referred to as such, and certainly put out of the church as one, but never referred to.
Yeah, well, even as he's put out of the church, he's never called a non-believer. So, if a person who has strayed that far is still under the chastising and correcting hand of God, Well, when someone says, "Oh, I pushed it too far," and someone will say, "Well, what if I deny Jesus?" Well, Peter pulled that off 3 different times, and the Lord still restored him.
Or even in scenarios where they're to be treated as a non-believer, abandoning your family, not taking care of the needs of your household, that in no way invalidates your salvation, but is a instance of church discipline where that needs to be regarded.
Yeah, you've denied the faith and are worse than a non-believer. It doesn't say you're a non-believer. It's saying that you're behaving in a worse way than a non-believer would.
Like that guy.
So, the bottom line is this. I love the way Proverbs chapter 3 puts it. It says, "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor let your heart detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, even as a father the son, in whom is all his delight." The book of Hebrews chapter 12 talks about how God deals with you as with sons. If you're without discipline, then you're not a son. One of the biggest mistakes I think any human being can ever make is either try to correct someone else's pet or their kid. You're not supposed to do that because it's not your pet and it's not your kid. You really want to get someone mad at you, overstep your bounds in those 2 areas. But the most important is this. I don't have the right to discipline someone else's child. That falls to the parent. And so one of the things that's a real proof positive of the fact that we belong to God is, first of all, we're convicted about our sin. We just don't go on our merry way going, la-di-da, no big deal, easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Hey, I'm going to just go ahead and do my thing. No, we are convicted about it. Even if we resist that conviction, there are circumstances where God will basically, pull the rug out from underneath us and let us scrape our spiritual knees a little bit to make sure that we don't go over the cliff. So, that's the most important thing to understand in all of this. When people say, oh, have I become reprobate, or, am I too far, or, things like this. If you're worried about that, you haven't. Trust me. Because it's only the Holy Spirit's work in you that would awaken you to your need for repentance.
Yeah, as the common illustration I present goes in the Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas Jim Carrey edition, at the end of the film, after his heart had changed, what was his reaction when the sleigh was going off the mountain? It was, "The presents, they'll be destroyed. And I care. What's the deal?" Well, understand that's the difference.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about the Grinch at the beginning of the movie as opposed to the end, we're also talking about the soul that's been saved before and after. If you actually care about your status before God, understand that is a miracle and not something possible without him. And if you have him, well, what does 1 John say? We have that same hope.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
he's going to put up with a lot more with us than we oftentimes are willing to put up with ourselves. So note that, and thank you again for the question, Mike. Got a question received at our phone lines who want to know what we think of Saint Nicholas of Myra.
Or Santa Claus.
Yeah, is he a good guy? Well, I guess
you take the first part, and I'll take the second part.
as far as his interactions with false doctrine or the history
No,
behind
you
him.
deal with Saint Nicholas. I'll deal with Santa Claus.
Okay, St. Nicholas of Myra, historical figure, completely legitimate, fully documented, and including some very embarrassing accounts on his part. Everything that we would look for in a historical figure we can establish with this guy. Myra is a region in what is known as modern-day Turkey, and being this region of Greek influence, he was one of the early church fathers that actually had the honor of attending the all-too credited and quoted Council of Nicaea. Now, as opposed to what Dan Brown would want you to believe in the Da Vinci Code, the Council of Nicaea had nothing to do with the Bible. They actually brought their Bibles to Nicaea to discuss the issue. It was about whether or not Jesus was God or a pseudo-spiritual being in light of this false doctrine that is modeled today by Jehovah's Witnesses called Arianism. The bishop, who was, again, influential church teacher in the regions of North, I believe, Eastern Africa, named Arius, had promoted his doctrine of Arianism, that Jesus wasn't deity because of these Greek assumptions, and he had brought in basically this alternate twist to the first cult that was called Gnosticism. So with all that being said, St. Nicholas was one of the attendees, one of the Christian leaders that had survived one of the most severe periods of persecution under Diocletian, and what was also interesting is he had plenty of scars to show for it. But when it came to standing up for his faith, he was not only informed, but he was passionate. And when Arius started going off on some of his misrepresentations and twistings of Scripture, and they just kept quoting the Bible back to him, and he said, well, you're just not reading that right, or it's out of context, or all those other fun things. He eventually got so heated that he punched him in the face. So when people ask me, what do you think of Santa Claus? And I say, oh, he's awesome. He punched heretics, and he was at the Council of Nicaea. So I got a lot to say positive for him. He didn't suffer fools or frauds gladly. There's also reports.
That's St. Nicholas, yeah.
Yeah, but noting the individual that he's also based on, he's very famously associated with Santa Claus as we know him today, because when he inherited his family's fortune, or what you could call that in those days, he had committed himself to a life of serving the Lord. So he took the money and just kind of slid it into the windows or in other apparatuses, the down the chimney hole concept, for people that were in need. He gave his belongings to the poor and wanted to invest his life, time, and treasure in Jesus Christ.
Right.
He also, according to some of the church accounts, note the myths vary, again, the accounts vary from myth all the way into folklore, but the basic premise is consistent because you don't twist something that isn't already there.
Right.
When it comes to the reports, some people say, oh, he resurrected these two girls from the dead after they had been boiled in pickle juice and all that other stuff. Others say that, he recovered these girls from slavery and redeemed them. That's almost certainly the more likely of the two scenarios of the people he was being generous to and giving his family's fortune and inheritance to. He was able to redeem these two girls out of a slavery auction and was able to set them free. So those are some of the things that we know about St. Nicholas of Myra. Now, obviously, going from the 4th century all the way to today, our impressions of him are quite different.
Yeah.
So what about Santa Claus?
Yeah, well, again, the idea of Santa Claus was sort of a kind of a transmogrification of who Saint Nick was all about from those particular roots, and it started out as a a game that people would play with their children, roughly around Christmas time, because the feast of St. Nicholas was roughly around this time, where they would commemorate his life on the church calendar. The big question that always comes up with Santa Claus is it okay for believers to teach their kids about Santa Claus? Because after all, the myth about going all over the world and coming down the chimney and leaving the presents and all this other stuff, isn't that in a sense a lie? And doesn't Santa Claus just crowd out the reason for the season, which is Jesus? Well, that's certainly something that can happen. Growing up in the situation I grew up in, I think I was probably about 6 or 7 years old when I figured out that Santa Claus's handwriting was suspiciously like my mom on the tags on the package, and that Santa Claus enjoyed the same adult beverage type that my dad did when we'd leave something out for him that night. But the whole idea of going, well, let's go along with this because it might mean more presents. That was pretty much what was going on. If it's a fun game that you play with children in a way to build some holiday memories, and you go out of your way to say, hey, this is just something that we do and it's fun and so on, and but you don't use it as a reason not to talk about the real reason for the season, the birth of Jesus. Then I think it's something that parents can do, as long as they're very careful to say, hey, this is a game, this is something we do, it's just a family tradition, but here's what the real reason for the season is. Randy Stonehill had a song on his classic album, Welcome to Paradise, called A Christmas Song for All Year Round, and it had a great refrain to it. He said, and I know that if St. Nicholas was here, he would agree that Jesus gave the greatest gift of all to you and me. They led him to the slaughter on a hill called Calvary, and mankind was forgiven when they nailed him to the tree. So I think if we keep that in focus, we're going to be okay.
Yeah, but as far as if you want to help with the loophole or get out of those awkward conversations too early, completely and in full sincerity say, yeah, Santa Claus was a real person.
Yeah.
But if it comes down to, oh, so the reindeer, the sleigh, the interdimensional warp drive engine that can alter time, and levitating Stantlers and all that stuff, that's not that's not scientific, let alone biblical. So,
Yeah, probably not.
all that being said, I got another question, and this was received off air from London, who wants to know, given all of the similarities of Pandora's box in Greek mythology and Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1, which one came first, and how do we deal with these common themes in myths as opposed to the Bible? Does it say, like some skeptics try to put forward, that the Bible was copied from these myths, or vice versa, and how do we judge that?
Well, I think the real issue is the vice versa, isn't it?
Yeah, if you're
Which
going
came
to,
first?
yeah, if you're going to consider a possibility, make sure that you include all possibilities and see which one explains the most data. For example, when you read the account of Pandora's box, understand that our understanding of Greek mythology didn't really come into existence, and by existence I mean writing. I'm sure people were able to tell stories before the 4th century.
Yeah.
But Herodotus was the first guy in Greek culture that really put an emphasis on writing down the things that everyone took for granted during his day. And again, 300 to 400 years before the time of Jesus, that is a long time ago in a country pretty far away from where we are. But if on the other hand you're going to account for that and say, okay, so here's where we have a solid date for when that story was being told in that way. Are we certain that the Jews had no influence on it, that the Greeks were the ones who influenced the Jews, and that they had no writings similar to Pandora's box before this? And that's the vice versa part of this, because there's a problem. Jews actually came up with it first when it came to writing. The books of Moses, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were written and dated to 1450 BC. That's over 1,000 years before the time of Herodotus, and where we have any writing resembling all of the myths and how they're presented in the modern day. Pandora's box, for example. So if I'm going to make the comparison and say, how did these stories become so similar? I have two options. Either it was a copyright infringement, to use the modern term, or it was a common source. The Jews were just closer to reality because they had an eyewitness as opposed to oral tradition. Now, what do I mean by the first, that this was a copyright infringement? Well, understand that from the time of Solomon, which was around 900 BC, he was all over trade, and he was on very good terms with a people known as the Phoenicians, the Syrophoenicians, that were pretty much the head honchos around the Mediterranean Sea, and were able to establish a pretty consistent contact with what we know today as Greece. It wasn't the Greek Empire yet, but Greece and the resources that they needed in Israel. So we have a connection with the Jews and the Greeks 900 years before Christ, 2,900 years before today, and 500 years before Herodotus, when these myths first start appearing. Also note that if the Jews have these sources in writing, we need to clarify, you can't copy from something that doesn't exist yet. If the Pandora's box story, as we know it today, is very similar to the Adam and Eve story, who had it in writing first? And even the most radical of skeptics are willing to acknowledge that a solid account of the books of Moses, the law, was around not just at the time of Solomon, but even the time of David, his father. He was all over the books of the law. He quoted from them regularly, and including in referencing the Adam and Eve account, we know that Adam and Eve existed a long time before Pandora and Hephaestus and all that other mess. So if I'm going to then make the comparison, I have to ask which came first, and that is certainly going to be Genesis through Deuteronomy. But then you have to say, well, that's unfair, because just because the Jews wrote it down first doesn't mean the Greeks weren't talking about it first. How do you know that the Greeks weren't talking about it with the Jews during their trade deals? And when the Jews exchanged their Septuagint, they found common parallels, and maybe, just maybe, they were copying from each other.
The Septuagint being the Greek translation of the Old Testament.
Given that Greeks spoke Greek.
Yep.
But this is what brings us to the second option, and this is the most charitable we could be in this situation. Knowing that this is, and this is a very important fact to consider, When we see common traits, common basic elements among all world religions, by the way, we don't say that every single religion is 100% false, otherwise no one would fall for it. But if on the other hand you're going to note those kernels of truth, by what standard do you say they all came from the original source? Because just to let our listeners know here, there were people who believed in the God of the Bible before the Bible. In fact, the first person to believe in the God of the Bible never had a Bible, and his name was Adam.
Yeah.
And Adam lived all the way, according to the dates that were given to us in Genesis chapter 4, to the birth of Noah. And Noah had 3 sons, going all the way to his death and the dispersion of the nations, named Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Japheth, in particular, was the one who went northwest and populated the majority of the regions of Turkey, Greece, and Europe. So if Japheth knew Noah, who knew Adam, well, let me ask you all a question. What do you think they did to kill the third of a year they spent on that ark while they were waiting for the rains to abate and pass on? Obviously, there's a bit of history, not only history, but first-hand eyewitness history, where Noah was able to mention that I saw great-grandpappy Adam, and he was a man who walked with God. I know people in our own family, like Methuselah and Enoch, who had working relationships with God and did things, or rather God did things in their lifetime that were just impossible otherwise. Now, note this point and this witness. If that story was going to leave any impression, which it still does today, then we need to take into consideration, do you think the Greeks might have remembered some of those basic elements from great-grandpappy Japheth? And that's the point. If the Chinese culture is going to have a common account of the global flood and acknowledging that fact, where do we say that came from? Was it something the Jews copied, or, avoiding the stereotypes that Hezbollah is trying to put on them these days, trying to reconcile the information and say it came from a common source, an eyewitness? And that's where Moses got his information, directly from God. So if we can test this information, we need to make sure we're considering all alternatives, not just the one that makes us popular among atheist websites and Twitter blogs.
Right.
So note that point. Either the Jews were the ones being copied from, since they were the ones who had this in writing first. That's what we can prove. Or they're both taking it from a common source, albeit with a lot of oral tradition and a lot of very bizarre and oftentimes gross themes and elements mixed in along the way. But what's going to be more accurate, eyewitness history or oral tradition? You always want to go with eyewitness history, especially when they put it in writing. And that's what we have here and why we trust it. Not only because Moses put his life on the line on regular occasions to transmit this data, but from the one who saw every event took place as it happened. Now, note that the Greeks sometimes were able to get things right when they observed politics, when they established their economics, and when they were building trade. Obviously, the Jews and everyone else in the Mediterranean benefited from that, and it served as basically the backbone of the Roman Empire when they were trying to build themselves up. But also note this as well. Just because you got something right doesn't mean you got everything right, and you therefore are the final authority.
Yeah, when it came to spirituality, they kind of dropped the ball.
So make sure that you don't confuse those two, London, and hopefully this will help you and those of you listening out. Now, understand as well, when we're talking about all these things, we need to make sure that we're being as charitable as possible, but we also want to make sure that we aren't saying something that isn't being said. Are we claiming that the Greek gods and goddesses, that the event of Pandora's box is also what happened with Adam and Eve?
No, but it really kind of comes down to, okay, how are you going to try to explain history and the development of cultures? There's 2 ways you can do it. One of them is to assume there is no God, that all can be explained by natural process, and kind of survival of the fittest Darwinianism applies even to the idea of cultures and so forth, that it all kind of develops from, sitting around a fire and, drawing, things on the sides of caves, and then it becomes more and more sophisticated because of evolutionism. Or you can say, all right, that's one way to look at it. Or is there a possibility that from a biblical worldview, man was created not is some, ape-like, dull-headed creature, but just as smart and just as intelligent as we are. That that man was able, in the flood of Noah, to be able to listen to God about a worldwide flood that was going to come, build an ark according to God's specifications, and survive that flood. And as a result of all people tracing themselves back to, as you mentioned, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah, even the Tower of Babel, remember, the big problem was that man didn't want to disperse and replenish the world. They wanted to stick together and build themselves a name at the Tower of Babel. And so God confused their languages and scattered them, and ended up fulfilling his purpose for mankind. But there was one point where everybody was on the same page. But if you take people who are on the same page, you scatter them abroad, well, over time, distortions are going to start to creep in. If you don't have, say, a written tradition to keep you on track, which makes more sense then? The fact that wherever you go in this world, you're going to find flood accounts, and the flood accounts have some really remarkable similarities to them. That one family were the only ones who survived, that animals were taken, that an entire worldwide flood engulfed the world, from the Laplanders in Finland down to the Aborigines in Africa, or I should say the Aborigines in Australia. You have these persistent flood stories that have been passed down through time. Now, you can see how they become fanciful if you read the Gilgamesh epic and so on. You see all the things that human imagination tries to throw in on top of it all, but underneath it, there is this theme that we can't seem to get away from. So, it's interesting when you talk to scientists and anthropologists and so on. They will tend to want to use a tool they call Occam's razor to get to the bottom of things. Now, Occam's razor states that all things being equal, the simplest explanation is probably the best. Is the simplest explanation somehow that all over the world, evolutionizing individuals all just kind of came up with some of these similar ideas, and it was just this big sort of happy circumstance that we've got these flood myths all over the world and so on? Or does it make more sense to say, no, it actually really happened, and we do have an account of it that isn't fanciful, that is very sober, that is very reserved? In fact, this shocks some people, but did you know that the Bible devotes more space to the story of Noah and the great flood than it does the creation of man? It does. And it explains things so tremendously. Francis Schaeffer, the great Christian philosopher, once said this, and I love this quote. He said that Christianity is like a key to reality that fits exactly right. C.S. Lewis, following on that same theme, said, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not just because I see it, but by it I also see everything else. And so when we take a look at this world from a consistently biblical worldview, it explains the whole thing. I often talk about how when I take a flight from here to California, where I grew up, it's fascinating when you look down on the Arizona desert down there, and especially the California desert. What do you see? Well, you see this huge floodplain down there, all of this sedimentary rock that is down there, all this sand down there, all of these waterways that seemingly were carved into all of this that have no source behind them, no where to get water from. You see these volcanic extrusions sticking out of these sandy reaches. You go to the Grand Canyon. When I was a kid, we went to the Grand Canyon and we got the standard lecture. The little Colorado River over millions and millions of years eventually eroded all of these things, and that's how we got the Grand Canyon. Unfortunately, the various strata of the Grand Canyon and the dating of these various strata doesn't line up with that theory. You have more complex fossils at the lower levels of the Grand Canyon than you do at the top. So now the prevailing theory is that somewhere around the Great Basin up in Nevada, there was a huge inland sea, and a natural rock water dam broke through, and it spilled all of this catastrophic force down there, and that's how you got the Grand Canyon.
Getting warmer.
Catastrophism. Interesting how that could explain things. When Mount St. Helens, for instance, went up in the early 1980s, it was very interesting. They went out and tested some of the lava domes that were there, and coming back from radiometric dating, they said, oh, this has got to be 1.5 years old.
It's about 5 months old.
There's a feature at Mount St. Helens called the Grand Canyon of Mount St. Helens, where you have very similar kind of layers of seeming strata that have been laid down over time and so on, that were laid down in the course of months, not millions of years. So, when you look at all of this, a biblical worldview does consistently explain these things, and it explains in the most direct way possible. So,
which then brings us, I think, to our last question. Is it reasonable to believe in young Earth creationism, or has that been scientifically disproven?
Yeah, that's a question that we get a lot. It seems to kind of come and go as far as its popularity is concerned. But, for a lot of people, they think that that's a non-starter as a question. Hasn't radiometric dating, they say, proven that the world is billions of years old, and that the universe must be that old as well? Well, whenever someone brings that up, one of the questions I ask them is, do you understand how radiometric dating works? Do you understand the process of it? And most of them don't. They just say, well, scientists have figured out by radiometric dating it's got to be this old.
Or even better, some will just make up a definition and try to ruse you on with
well,
it.
But just we're talking about someone who's sincere. They'll say, well, smarter people than me have figured this out. It's radiometric dating. They figured it out. Well, radiometric dating basically works like this. You take a sample of rock, you find a radioactive element in it, and that radioactive element is divided into two parts. One is what's called a parent element, that is the actual radioactive part of the sample, and then a daughter part, that is the kind of element that is produced by a radioactive element decaying over time, like uranium eventually becoming lead. If you measure the ratio of uranium and lead in a particular sample, you can, by conjecture, come to a conclusion about how long that uranium has been there by the amount of daughter element that you run into there.
Yeah, it's radioactive because it's constantly giving off these little isotopes, and based off of how much of these isotopes have been given off, it's been compared to the amount of sand that's been passing through an hourglass.
Yeah, or if you walked into a room, for instance, and you saw that a candle had been burning in there, and it was about halfway down. Well, if you knew how long that candle was at the beginning, you measured it out, and you were able to determine how, the rate of melting of the wax, you could pretty much figure out how long that candle had been burning in that situation. But you're making some huge assumptions here. First of all, like the parent and daughter elements. You're assuming that you know how much of the parent and daughter element were there to begin with. How much of the original was there? Was any parent element added to that particular sample, or is that all there is there? Can we know for sure that the rate of decay in these particular samples has always been consistent, that it hasn't changed over time? We don't really know because we haven't been around long enough to figure that out. Has the sample been contaminated in any way? Well, the interesting thing is, as far as measuring a radioactive sample, scientists tell us that the results of a radiometric date can be radically affected if the sample has been exposed to oxygen, if it's been exposed to water, if it has been exposed to other radioactive elements. So, there's huge assumptions that you have to make to be able to say, well, because we've got this much uranium and this much lead, we know for sure that this sample has to be this old.
Because I can make the historical claim that it started out as pure radioactive material with no lead, and that the amount of lead has been constant and uninterrupted since the moment it started decaying.
So we got to ask ourselves another question before we go, okay, it's been proven radiometric dating is, the be-all and end-all. How accurate are radiometric dates. Well, we mentioned Mount St. Helens earlier. Mount St. Helens blew up in 1980. A lava dome at Mount St. Helens was measured by radiometric dating and was determined to be 2.8 million years old, even though people were around to watch it form. The Kilauea Iki basalt, which was laid down in 1959, was measured by one radiometric date as being 15.3 million years old, even though people watched it being laid down before their very eyes. So what we're dealing with here, and this is what it comes down to, is this, is the difference between circumstantial evidence and eyewitness evidence. What's circumstantial evidence?
Circumstantial evidence is what you infer or assume was the case based off of information you assume is the case beforehand.
It's not based on anybody seeing something happen, but because certain bits and pieces of evidence are around, you make assumptions and then you determine. Like, to use our hourglass analogy. If an hourglass, has a half an hour of sand left in it, when you walk into a room, you go, oh, that thing has been pouring forth sand for a half an hour. Unless, of course, someone had turned it over and then reset it. So you're assuming an awful lot of things. That's why in a court of law, eyewitness testimony always trumps circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence can support a verdict, but eyewitness testimony, valid eyewitness testimony, is what usually will win the day.
Because that's all you really have to prove. Do we have eyewitnesses and can we trust them? And that's the crux of what Ken Ham's argument was with Bill Nye when he said there's a difference between historical science and
operational science.
So you can observe things in the present operationally, see how they function, and make inferences on them based off of how they usually go, but you can't make historical claims and say this is the way it always has been, always will be, and is always going to be.
That's a statement of faith right there, because nobody was around to see it, right? Nobody can actually prove that scientifically. So where does that leave us? Are we all going, well, who knows? Maybe not. Well, actually, here's the crux of the issue as far as we are concerned as believers in Christ. We look to what Jesus said about this. In the book of Mark, chapter 10, Jesus made a pretty outlandish statement. He says, have you not read that from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female? Now, notice Jesus makes a statement about Adam and Eve. From the beginning of creation, he made them male and female. He didn't say from the end of it. Now, those who want to teach evolutionism or try to shoehorn it into the message of the Bible have a real problem there, because, if we're going to be honest, human beings, as we know them today, are very late arrivals on the evolutionary time scale. We just showed up kind of a blink ago as far as the flow of time is concerned. But Jesus has said from the very beginning, Adam and Eve were in fact there, and they were actual historical personages. So what it comes down, and we could cite a number of different references that Jesus himself made to the book of Genesis and to its historicity, mentioning Noah and the flood as an actual historical event. But the big question is this: who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe some scientists like Carl Sagan, who said the cosmos is all there is, was, or ever will be? No disrespect, but Carl Sagan's a moldering in the grave. Or are you going to believe Jesus Christ, who claimed to be God, who claimed to have been there? He said, before Abraham was, I am, who tells us what the nature reality is and proved his credentials by rising from the dead in a moment of history. That's what it really comes down to.
And he was the eyewitness that Moses got Genesis from, and so we take him over modern skeptics with an axe to grind.
Hey, God bless you, and thanks for the birthday greetings. We'll see you
You've been
tomorrow.
listening to A Reason for Hope. Thank you again for joining us as we continue our journey through God's Word, one question of the heart at a time. Until we meet again, we would love to connect with you. You can text or email your questions to questionsforhope@gmail.com. You can also find out more about our ministry at calvarychristianfellowship.com. And be sure to join us next time on A Reason for Hope. A Reason for Hope is an outreach ministry of Calvary Christian Fellowship in Tucson, Arizona.